If I learn anything from week 3, it's that I know nothing. We don't know anything. The NFL action continues to shift us in every which way. And so I think going into week 4, one of the things that I do want to try and take note of is just how much we can really pull away from this. While we can be as certain about our takes as we want to be, and of course, I'll try and be as confident in my analysis as possible, the players are going to try and give us a different story afterwards. So, with that being said, let's hop into all the action. Of course, I'm Chris Allen here to talk to you about how we can approach our Guillotine Leagues. And I've got some help this week. If there's anybody that I know of that can at least be more sure, more confident about any of the takes that we're going to have, it's going to be Fantasy Life's own Matt Lamarca. Lamarca, how you doing, man? Can you at least help me make sense of what's going on? Because I know after 3 weeks, I don't know how to approach any of this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, just as we all thought, right? Everything has gone exactly to plan. We'll talk a little bit about some guys that maybe this season hasn't gotten off to the greatest start for them and what your level of panic should be. But if there's one thing, Chris, that I can say about myself, I'm always confident. So
That,
I'll help
and
you
that's
out
what we need. That's what we need because I know, at least for myself, I'll at least be like, yeah, this sounds about right, but who's to say really this sounds like the right approach and all of that. I'll give as many caveats as possible. So don't take my word for it. Definitely take Lamarca's word for it. So we're here hanging out for about the next hour or so, asking a bunch of answering as many questions as possible. I see a couple of folks, or at least one person in the chat already asking questions about how to approach their Guillotine Leagues for week 4. So we'll talk strategy, we'll talk player analysis, we'll talk rest of season stuff because we do have bye weeks approaching. So any of those strategy questions you might have, please drop them in the chat and we'll get to them as quickly as we can. So, all right. I mean, do we want to start with the listener
Yeah, let's dive
question?
right into this question.
Yeah, I dig it. All right. So this one from Chris Hop. What's going on, Chris? A fellow Christopher in the chat. So playing my first ever Guillotine League, 32 teams. That's insane. 32 teams. The bidding seems insane. Well, yeah, I can understand that. How do you ever pick up anyone on waivers when guys like DeAndre Swift go for 600 and Lad goes for 360? Lamarca, I'm trying to think of how best to approach this question because it almost feels like to me with that many people in your league, and of course, after if you started with 32, we're now through 3 weeks, so you're still down to 29 players or whatever. You almost have to be aggressive to pick up anyway because you're even the waiver wire with that many teams drafting, your waiver wire has to be completely barren. So if there is anybody available that has any shot at production, you would have to not just want to be aggressive to pick them up for your own roster, but you're also playing keep away from everybody else. So I'm thinking that assuming $1,000 budget, having to pay that much in order to pick up somebody, you have to think of what you would reasonably want for that player, but then afterwards probably plus up a little bit more just to make sure that you're getting ahead of the 26, 27, 28 other managers that are in your league.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I'd be curious to know a little bit more about the format, Chris. So if you can maybe provide us a couple of more details, like are two teams getting chopped every week? Um,
Oh yeah, that's a good point.
like I'm just a little bit curious about that because you're right, Chris Allen, aka the other Chris. Like the only players that are going to be available on the waiver wire are from the teams that are getting chopped the week prior.
Uh-huh.
So like there's no like Trey Benson's not going to be available in that league. Anybody who could remotely help your team would have been drafted in the initial draft. So
Mm-hmm.
like the way I would approach it is you need to really take the long view here. If guys like DeAndre Swift are going for $600 and Lad McConkey's going for 360, you need to try and survive as long as humanly possible with the team that you drafted and just keep all that money in your wallet. As the field thins, you're just going to get more and more and better players showing up on the waiver wire each week. So if you are able to save your money, you are going to be able to absolutely dominate free agency down the stretch. Because let's be honest, DeAndre Swift is not helping you win a championship, right? If you make it to the end, you're going to be starting, you know, guys who are top 10, top 5 even across every position. Those are the guys that you need to build your team around. And if my team is going to be a little bit weaker in week 4 because I don't have DeAndre Swift, that's just a risk I'm going to have to take because I'm playing to win. I'm not playing to be drawing dead by the time we get to week 9.
I really like that answer. And I'll take it a step further, or at least in bringing, because you were saying drawing dead. The analogy that I was thinking about was poker. Because if you sit down and play, you sit at a table, you play at a ring game or whatever, even if you host a home game, you're not playing every single hand. I mean, if you do, and that's your particular style, you want to mix in and get some chips in.
You gotta see some of the home games I play at.
I know, and like I've played in plenty of them where you just see somebody wants to throw in some chips into the pot every single time they get 2 cards. But if you want to at least pick your spots and find a way that it's like you have your specific range of hands, or at least for applying it to this analogy, you have the players that you know that you want to get. You know the deficiencies on your roster, whether it's your potentially weaker at running back, potentially weaker at wide receiver, tight end, or whichever position. You know where some of your weak spots at. So to Lamarcus' point, finding the spots where you're weakest at, and then of course when those other teams get chopped that have the players that would address some of those needs, that would be the spot that you would want to pounce. And so on top of the fact that you'll have to be aggressive relative to the rest of your league, not always trying to hop at every top 10 or top 20 player that falls onto the waiver wire, that's where you can wind up losing a lot of the money that you might have available to you. So I'm completely with that, Lamarca. I think that's a good approach to it. So finding a way to, again, hone in on some of your weak spots, and then afterwards, once those players do get put on the waiver wire that address those, that's when you take your shot. And until then, trying to wait it out, make sure the rest, and at the same time, the rest of your league is using a lot of their money in order to acquire some of those guys that you know aren't going to be the guys that are going to really make a difference in terms of getting you to the playoffs and obviously to a championship. So afterwards, once you do that, you'll have at least the ability or the flexibility to wind up getting some of those guys that will really help you push for the playoffs. So I like that approach. All right, got a couple more questions. I mean, we can keep going on with some of. We'll do one more, and then maybe. Oh no, we can answer these next 2, and then afterwards, how about we head into a couple other questions we might have. So let's see. So from Never Had It So Good, you think Tolbert is the next man up in Dallas? So let's see how best to approach it. Lamar, can you pull up the utilization for Dallas just from week 3? I was taking a look at that earlier this week because I have the same question, because at least on a couple of my rosters, I've got George Pickens on a couple of teams. I've got Jake Ferguson on a couple of teams. And then even for some of the other guys that are out there, I do have a squad that doesn't have any of the wide receivers for Dallas. So I'm trying to see if there's a way that we can kind of isolate the guys that we would want to try and get. Let me see if I can pull that up real quick. So let's see. Let's pull up a window. Let me try and tech lord on over there. So let's see. Can I actually pull it up? No, it's not letting me pull it up like real quick. No, I'd have to. There we go. Because if I'm looking at it right now, so in week 3, since we can assume that Tolbert essentially played the entire game because CeeDee Lamb went down relatively early, 89% of the routes, and also a 14% target share. So at least that's our basis for his usage. Now, of course, this was a game where they didn't plan to have that extended amount of route tree or that extended amount of usage for Jalen Tolbert. So let's say with a full week of practice, knowing that CeeDee Lamb is going to be missing multiple weeks, you should see an uptick in how often Dak Prescott is going to be going his way. So here we go. I mean, looking at how much he was used just this past week, around 14-15% of the targets, 20% air yard share. But I think the thing that I was trying to key in on mostly is he going to be getting some of those layup targets? Because especially for week 4, let's consider the defense that they're going to be going up against. It's going to be the Micah Parsons revenge game with them facing the Packers. And in the week 3 game, was it Tolbert getting a lot of those underneath routes from Dak Prescott? And at least the data somewhat suggests that that's the case. Around 40% of his snaps were played from in the slot, and it was mostly still like Pickens playing on the outside. So yes, at least to me, just given the route rate, how much he was used completely on the fly, more or less compared to what we expect in other weeks. Yeah, I would see the chance for Tolbert to continue to have something of an expanded role. And given how often Dak Prescott likes to throw, their passer over expectation, seeing or at least viewing Jalen Tolbert as the next man up in Dallas, I think that's the right approach. But Lamarco, like, how are you viewing the Jalen Tolbert? I know he's been just a guy more or less when they've had other pass catchers involved, but without having CeeDee Lamb there, I would say value him as a maybe low end wide receiver 2, high end 3, somewhere in there. Does that seem reasonable to you?
Yeah, I might lean more like low end wide receiver 3. I think that
Okay.
he is, clearly going to be behind George Pickens in the pecking order. And Jake Ferguson has been really involved at tight end to start the year. So I think, somewhere in that 15 to 20% target share is pretty reasonable for him. And we know Dallas is going to have to throw the ball a lot. So in guillotine leagues in particular, I think he is very much a flex worthy player to consider. Um, if he's out there, I'm not sure how aggressive I'm necessarily going to be targeting him on the wire. I would be happy to add him to my team if I could get him for, somewhere in the $5 to $10 range. But is Jalen Tolbert somebody that I expect to be contributing to my guillotine roster, in week 8, in week 10, in week 13? Like, definitely not. By that point, we'd have moved on to better players in our starting lineup. And this is why I always preach, and really this is from Paul Charchian, the man himself, who you can listen to on Tuesdays and Thursdays on the Chop podcast. But the number one thing is budget preservation. If you're spending $50 on Tolbert one week and then $50 on, you know, player Y the next week, that money dries up real quick. And by the time you get to the end of the season, you have a roster full of players that aren't necessarily going to help you. So again, I would rather finish as the third worst team every week and just continue to have the most amount of money left than be finishing higher up on the leaderboard, but I am diminishing my fab every single week. So it's a little bit of a game of chicken, right? Like, I want to be just safe enough so that I can continue to advance, but at the same time, I'm trying to give myself as many outs as possible for the long run.
No, and I agree with that. So while folks will see Tolbert as the next man up, how aggressive do we really want to be on the? How does that next man up value translate into actual on-field production? And I think we can both agree that he still falls into the second or third option on the pecking order for Dak Prescott. And it's not like we can really project seeing him in the 20 to 25% of the team's targets for the Cowboys. So if that's not the case, really, should he be a guy that we target on the waiver wire? Potentially, depending on what other options you currently have. And to your point, I definitely see him as more of a flex option than somebody I instantly want to slot into my starting wide receiver spot. So that really somebody you want to pay 30-40%, because when we say next man up, we're thinking it's the guy that's going to benefit from the injury type of scenario, like a Trey Benson, the James Conner type situation from just this past weekend. Not really the case here for Jalen Tolbert. CeeDee Lamb is expected back at some point during the season, which really kind of diminishes the potential, I would say, the ceiling or the longevity of how much he could be used over the next 3-4 weeks. So if we're kind of capping his usage at 15 and 20% of the targets, and really only thinking that he's going to be still the wide receiver, let's say even pass catcher 2 or pass catcher 3, because of course, Jake Ferguson getting involved. Javonte Williams has also mixed in the passing game as well. So it kind of reduces what the potential output for Jalen Tolbert would be on a week in, week out basis. So, yep, next man up for sure. But getting aggressive on Tolbert in the on your waivers, I would say he's more of a lesser priority relative to the other guys you might find out there. Shoot, I might even put him in the same bucket as like a Trey Tucker or something like that. But Trey Tucker even has a higher ceiling than him. So that's kind of where we're both seeing Jalen Tolbert's value sitting at after week 3. All right, let's do one more listener question from Craig Michael. In my first Guillotine League of 10 people, we have a $300 budget. Bijan team got chopped. How much would you spend on him? So I don't know, Lamarca, because this almost sounds like one of the types of players that you were talking about earlier, where you would want to play chicken with and let your roster kind of sit at the back end of the group until you really get to the back end of the season, where you have some of those players pop up on the waiver wire that you're really going to want to spend for. $300 budget, only 10 people. I'm kind of thinking this would be the guy that I'd want to be as aggressive as I would want to, compared to other leagues where you might have more managers and all of that. So I'm thinking you want to get pretty aggressive on it, but would you approach this differently and let somebody else take him, and you still want to play that chicken game and wait until later on in the season?
Yeah, I would probably not be getting Bijan, right? Like, I just know that I'm not going to be bidding enough. Um, we've seen the top running backs in over the first few weeks, right? Like, Derrick Henry was a huge chop for people after week 2. Saquon
Mm.
Barkley was a top 6 chop player heading into this week. And when those players hit the wire, people lose their minds. They spend, half their budget on one player. And if you only have a $300 budget, I could see people going, upwards of like $200.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to remember, again, when you get to the finals, you're going to need to have a roster that consists of 8 Bijan Robinson quality options, one at each position.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're spending upwards of 2/3 or more of your budget on one player, you are not leaving yourself the resources that you need to add the rest of those players to your roster. So I would probably bid on a $300 budget. My general rule of thumb is I don't really like to go above 20% on any
Mm-hmm.
one player. So that would be about $60. If you wanted to get a little bit more aggressive, 75. I could even see, if you wanted to go up to 100. But anything more than that to me is just a risk, because guess what? There's no guarantee that Bijan isn't on the wire again next week, or Saquon Barkley could hit the wire again. There's always going to be good players available to bid on. And if you don't get this particular one, you will always have more opportunities. So again, the goal is just survive, advance, keep that bankroll nice and full. And then when you're at the end and you're going against guys who have spent all their money already, you can just pick the bones off that waiver wire.
And I like that approach, because if you can pull up the utilization report for Bijan, and we'll just stick with him because he was the one that was asked about in this question, but also his utilization kind of brings up I would say the dichotomy is probably not the right term, but I would say the discrepancy between name value and how they're actually being used on the field. Because if we say the name Bijan Robinson, we're thinking a guy that's going to be an every down usage type player. He's the 3 down back. He's used in the 2-minute drill, also used in the goal line. I mean, he was a top 3, top 4 pick in most leagues coming into the season. But if you look at the utilization, that's not the types of numbers that we should expect to see for a running back with that high of an ADP. And that's why he has been one of the players that is probably on most of the chopped rosters, because Tyler Algier mixed in on the goal line. That's why in week 2, 0% of the inside the 5 carries. I mean, Tyler Algier still mixing in on base downs in some of the other scenarios, and that's why Robinson has only crested 60% of the rushing attempts just once. So even seeing that name and thinking about his draft cost, most folks would want to flock to the waiver wire and say, I need to be aggressive and get this guy. But here's where using some of the tools that we have over here at Fantasy Life can highlight how much they're going to be used. And to Lamarco's point, the risk associated with using a lot of your fab in order to pick up somebody like that onto your roster. Because to his point, especially in a league where it's a 10-team league, there is going to be another Bijan Robinson like player on the waiver wire next week. So while the other folks have blown a significant portion of their fab in order to pick up Bijan this week, you might have a shot at Derrick Henry next week, or Jahmyr Gibbs the week afterwards. And so, kind of playing that chicken game and waiting out to see how many other players will have potential duds or how their usage might shift in order to create a scenario where their usage might fall out and be the reason that fantasy manager's roster gets chopped. That's where you can exploit some of that information that you might have, and then wind up getting a player that you really need, especially at a better time in the season, which will help you propel you into the playoffs and onto a championship. All right. Let's see. A couple other questions. I mean, we got more questions in the chat. I'm digging this right here, man. Like we've got some active people here. Let's see. Let's do another one from Corwin Sims. Saquon has been on the wire twice. That's what I'm talking about right there. On the wire twice in my league. First time for 950 and second was for 350. And actually, I wonder, let's apply that same logic real quick. Let me pull up Saquon's utilization. And again, if you don't have the tier 2 sub over at fantasylife.com, in order to kind of highlight or pick out some of these, I would say, changes in expectation regarding the usage for players that we hold in high regard, I would say definitely go ahead and do that. All right. So I would say here, well, take that back. I was going to think that, at least given the production or how much he some of the results, that the opportunity hasn't been there. But in this case, it has. I mean, over 70% of the carries in each of the 3 games. Target shares north of 15%. I mean, those are, around like over 15%, like through 3 weeks. Those are the numbers you would expect to see for a first round type of running back, especially since he was also drafted in the same area as Bijan Robinson. And the UR score, which takes into account not just how often you're being used, but then also the results. Those are the types of scores that you would want to see. So I think the problem has been when he puts up some of those, like at least a dud week relative to what we expect out of a running back like Barkley, and it's Jalen Hurts pushing his way into the end zone, or especially just this past weekend with the 2 passing touchdowns versus the increased rushing usage. That's where the potential for the risk associated with a running back like Barkley comes into play. So it's entirely possible that this is how you can find a running back like Barkley, like Bijan Robinson, fall onto the waiver wire. But I'd say here, coming over to fantasylife.com and just kind of checking out, okay, well, yeah, that player is out there on the waiver wire, but does their opportunity really speak to somebody that I want on my roster? Should I even really be going after them? And in some cases, like Bijan's, I would say, no, let's go ahead and wait. Let him be somebody else's problem. Let somebody else spend a lot of their money on them, and then we can pick up somebody similar later on. With Barkley, again, I would still also try and wait, just given how much longer, how many more of these decisions we're going to have to make over the course of the season. Again, we're only a month in. Still plenty of ball to be played. So waiting a little bit longer is at least the way that I would like to approach it. But LaMarcus, especially for Saquon Barkley, in this case, do you see it differently, or would you have the same approach?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to give credit here to Brian Johnson, who hosts the Tuesday show along with Paul Charchian. He calls these slip through the crack bids. I will throw some slip through the crack bids on guys like Saquon and Bijan. Anyone who's a high end player that like I would be happy to have on my roster. I just don't necessarily want to break the bank for. So, if it costs me $100, $150, I'll throw that on those players. And if for some reason my league just falls asleep at the wheel, I'm happy to get them at a discount. And if not, I'm at least making some other owner pay a higher percentage than maybe they would ideally like to.
I dig that. Man, there's so many underlying games that you can play and strategies you can apply to Guillotine that I would say there might be possible to have some of those in your regular managed leagues. But here with Guillotine, there are some other
Yeah,
aspects
you
of this
never have to
format.
worry about Saquon being on the wire in a Guillotine league.
Unless something has gone horribly wrong, and those are the stories that you hear about. I was drunk and I meant to drop this guy in favor for the other guy. So those are the types of things that you hear. But here for Guillotine, if Saquon's out there on the waiver wire, somebody's upset because their roster just got chopped and they're done for the season. So yeah. That's tough. All right, well, we got another question, and this was from our own Lori. Hey, Lori. done well in the last few weeks, but a couple of my players are popping up on the DMP list. Ricky P, Ted McMillan, or Teteroa McMillan,
Mm.
sorry, Terry McLaurin, and Jalen Warren. Do I start bidding to pick up players or wait it out? I don't know, Lamarca, I'll toss this one to you first. How would you approach a lot of the injury luck that's going to hit every single one of us? Because right now, especially for people that have been scrambling at quarterback to cover for all of the toe injuries that have run rampant across the league, and then of course now with just your run of the mill knee, quad, ankle, those are now becoming a more of a reality for us after 3 weeks. How are you approaching some of these? Again, the number of Q tags that a lot of people are going to see on their rosters heading into week 4.
Yeah, the year of the toe injury, right, Chris? I mean, that's
That's it.
that's that's your thing.
Mhm.
Um, you made a great point during last week's stream. Like, there's there's a difference between making the all-in move and just making small upgrading moves along the way. So really, like, if you have a bench, hopefully you have a few alternatives on there at this point that maybe you don't feel super comfortable starting them, but in a break glass in case of emergency situation, they're there.
Mhm.
If not, you can certainly look to the waiver wire and try to find some stopgaps. Jalen McMillan, maybe for Tampa Bay, is a potential stopgap. We talked about for the Cowboys, Mr. Tolbert there could be a,
Yep.
a, a perfect stopgap option. So again, these are players that you necessarily don't want to be spending money on every single week, but there's nothing wrong with adding a few players if they're only going to cost you, a couple bucks here and there,
No, I
especially
agree.
with all the questionable tags.
Yeah, and that's where I'd be looking to at least have some of those smaller bids where it's like a few bucks here and there that's not going to completely hurt your budget or the overall goal of saving as much money as possible so that once you get into weeks 9, 10, 11, and you're really looking to push for the playoffs, that you still have the money in order to make those big swings on the home run players. And Lamarca, you brought up a good point there about, well, just finding some of those stashes or maybe even some of the guys that you drafted sitting on your roster that you just haven't been able to churn yet. You haven't been able to get them off of your roster. And I'll pull up one of mine real quick to give you an idea of what I've been working with or what I've been thinking through. Because, so see, here's one of the rosters that I have here over on guillotineleagues.com. I drafted Tank Bigsby thinking he was going to be the Jacksonville Jaguars, like overall RB1 at some point. He's sitting behind Saquon. And in a managed league, I would potentially want to still hold on to a guy like him just for the handcuff opportunity. But in this case, for Lori, what you're talking about, he would be one of the guys that I look to switch out for someone that's on the waiver wire. I mean, Rashid Shaheed, and yeah, and again, in managed leagues, would want the wide receiver depth on my roster. But you see here, I picked up Jalen Tolbert. I've got Xavier Worthy, but we'll see what his health looks like, assuming he's back for week 4. So I do have some other options that I could move into my starting flex or wide receiver spots if I needed to. So if I'm prioritizing who I'd want to keep on my roster and who I'd want to drop off. I mean, I could see a scenario where Rashid Shaheed, I don't think I'm going to wind up starting him this week. So if I need to have that much depth on my roster for somebody that I would move into my starting slot, he might be a guy that I cut. So at least walking through, or at least doing the mental exercise of, well, who do I really want to keep on my roster? Who's really going to be helping me for week 4, and also who's like most likely still going to be on the wire, let's say in week 5 or week 6. Shaheed, probably. Tank Bigsby, also probably, unless something happens to Saquon Barkley. And I'm like literally knocking on wood right now so that doesn't happen. But it's those types of things where I'm thinking through, all right, well, I need help now, but I don't need star power. I just need floor power, really. I need the Trey Tuckers of the world. I need potentially the Jalen Tolberts of the world. Those types of guys, or even, let's say, Marvin Mims or Troy Franklin. I'm tossing out some of those wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 types of guys that don't necessarily have the same level of interest or popularity from fantasy managers yet, but they're good enough right now that if I can squeeze out 4 catches for 50 yards or something along those lines to at least keep me going and up until week 5, I'd be happy with that. At least that's how I'd approach it. But Lamar, do you see it differently?
Yeah, I think a good general rule of thumb is like if you're not going to feel comfortable starting them if you need them, then why are they on your roster? Right? Like Rashid Shaheed, I'm not saying that there's no situations where you wouldn't consider playing him, but like if you need him this week because you're dealing with injuries and you don't feel good about the fact that you're going to have to play him, that makes him a very logical candidate to just replace with somebody that you feel better about.
Right.
And you can do that with, smaller $0, $1 bids. So you don't, when I say like sit on your budget, it doesn't mean you can't make moves. You just have to be making small moves and you can churn through, the bottom of your roster pretty consistently and find upgrades on guys that slip through the cracks.
Oh no, that's how I took you. What you were saying earlier, the mark. I thought you meant just no moves at all. You can't
Yeah,
touch any of the money that you've got up until it's week 10 or week 11, and that's when it's
that's
Saquon
it. And
Barkley
we're hitting the
or
club.
yeah, and then it's at like you're just blowing it all right there, just big spender, and then you're swapping out all of your players for all the wide receiver ones and RB ones that are sitting out there on the wire. That's how I took it. I mean,
Yep. I mean, we all know there there are lots of things about myself that don't correlate well to guillotine leagues. I am very much somebody that likes to sling it around from time to time.
there you
So,
go.
yeah, it pains me sometimes to have to hold on to all the money, but yeah, just small moves. You highlighted a couple guys last week. I think we've touched on a few this week that could be worth trying to add to the bottom of your roster,
Mhm.
so that hopefully, if you get bad health situation with some of these guys who are questionable, you at least have some sort of fallback option to lean on.
And actually, all right, let's see. Let's take it a step further. We'll do this for Lori. How about this? I'll actually, can you share my screen again? Because let's
Absolutely.
let's go through who's available. I'll do it in my league, right? I think this was an 18 team league, if memory serves. So I don't know what size league you're working with, Lori, but let's look at who's out there on the waiver wire and see who might be somebody that you could reasonably pick up, right? I mean, Trey Tucker, we already talked about him. Tyquan Thornton, and he might
Mhm.
have at least a little bit more popularity, just how often Patrick Mahomes has been going towards him. But let's see, scroll down even a little bit farther than that. Romeo Dobbs, who didn't have a ton of production even without Jaden Reed in the lineup just this past week. Sterling Shepard, especially with the Mike Evans injury, he might have at least that floor level type of production. And he's been in the league so long that folks, he might not be on the highest on everybody's radar as of right now, but those, I mean, now I wouldn't say Cedric Tillman, Marvin Mims. I mentioned him
I
earlier.
think Cavante Turpin could
Yes,
be somewhat interesting,
Commando Turbo,
for a
absolutely.
dollar or so.
Parker Washington, who's popped up multiple games so far with the Jaguars, catching a few passes here and there. I mean, so there are some of these guys that, while everybody's going to scroll up and see Trey Tucker after his 40-point bonanza just this past week as the person that they're going to want to target, you could probably scroll down a little bit farther and find guys that, again, if you're just looking for floor and you just want to spend just a few dollars in order to get through to week 5, I think there are a few players. I see a couple of guys out here that can probably help you do that, like Parker Washington. Let's see if we can scroll even
Charge
further.
mentioned Hunter Renfro on
Yes.
Tuesday. His usage seems to be trending upwards. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, there's guys available.
And let's see, we'll do a quick scroll through the running backs. I mean, Kamani Vidal with the Najee Harris injury, I don't know if he's going to how much use. That's more of a projection than anything else. But at least, again, making the move, that could be a small dollar bid that you can use in order to get somebody on your roster that might have a little bit of usage here and there. George Holani, I don't think so now with Zach Charbonnet being at least a bit healthier. But there are some other players out there from a running back standpoint that can also do the same thing. But yeah, wide receiver, it's a little bit easier because there's a little bit more depth, at least from what I'm seeing. But yeah, going through that same exercise to figure out who you could wind up swapping out that isn't as popular from a fantasy standpoint, but could still give you that floor production that you're going to need to move on to week 5. All right. Well, before we get going on to the next, I see another question from Mort. We will get to you in just a second, but wanted to at least tell people about the sponsor for this show. It's from Xfinity. So it's introducing the 5-year price guarantee from Xfinity. One internet price, 5 years guaranteed. Life is unpredictable, but the price of your internet shouldn't be. Get a reliable price for a reliable connection. And by all in, we mean all in. Get Wi-Fi equipment and unlimited data included. Change is always happening. RB1 seemingly never repeat. 2030's fantasy wide receiver one may not even be in college yet. But no matter what changes in 5 years, the price for your internet will stay the same. Learn more at xfinity.com. Restrictions apply. New residential customers only. Taxes and fees extra and subject to change. Okay. Well, what else we got? I see that, yeah, I just mentioned beforehand, we got this question from Mort, and this one also falls into the bucket of players that everybody's going to see the names. Some folks are going to want to try and get those guys on their roster as soon as possible. $1,000 Fab League, Derrick Henry and Ladd McConkey are both available. Bid amounts for them. Henry, again, I'm putting him in that Saquon Bijan bucket that you will find somebody like him later on. And unless you are starting, I don't even know who you'd be starting that you would essentially say that you need to have them. Maybe if you had Isaiah Pacheco and let's say Isaiah Pacheco and Chase Brown.
That's exactly who I was thinking.
Maybe then I would think about saying that there's a need for me to have a guy like Derrick Henry on my roster. But outside of that, LaMarca, I'm still thinking that there has to be, or there should be some other running backs out there on the waiver wire, especially after this latest round of chops, that won't be as productive as Derrick Henry. But if we're just looking to get to week 5, they're not going to cost you as much in order to have them. Oh, look at it. He's starting David Montgomery and Kamara right now. So like you're good. You didn't have to spend any money.
Yeah, I mean, Derrick Henry to me, certainly, like, to use another Paul Charchian term, he is an end game player, right? Like, he is a player that if he was your starting running back in the championship week, you would be perfectly content with that. So I see no problems in throwing in like a 20% bid on him. Someone will probably bid more, which means you're not going to get him. But in case everybody else decides they're scared about his fumbling issues or whatever, maybe you can get him for that price, and I would be happy to do so at around $200. Ladd McConkey, I got to be honest, he terrifies me at the moment. I have plenty of McConkey shares from the preseason. I did not think Keenan Allen was going to be as big of a factor as he is. I did not think Quentin Johnston was all of a sudden going to turn into like prime Randy Moss. I'm worried that the usage that we've seen through the first 3 weeks is not like an outlier. I think it's a possibility that he is the wide receiver 3 on his own team. So he is not a player that I am looking to get in the business of right now. I might throw a couple of bucks on him, but somebody is going to play the buy low narrative. This is a guy who is expected to be, a top 15, 20 option at the position. So someone is going to probably put close to like $100 on him, I would say. I'm not going to be coming anywhere near that price tag.
Yeah. Because especially in this format, in managed leagues, I actually wrote up the trade analyzer piece for fantasylife.com. So go ahead and check that out. And I did list Ladd McConkey as a buy low, just looking at his first retarget share. So I define first retarget share as when the pocket is clean and Justin Herbert gets rid of the ball in less than 2.5 seconds. He is a close second to Keenan. I think he's close second in terms of first retarget share. Also, if you at least not even adhere to, or if you buy the average separation scores, his average yards of separation, I think it was about 3.8 yards, which is one of like the top, like his top 5 number amongst all wide receivers so far through 3 weeks. He's getting open, he's winning on routes, and he's also part of a good offense with a good quarterback. I mean, those are the things that we would typically want to buy in. And that's for managed leagues. I can understand wanting to buy low on him. In this format, where you need those points in order to advance to the following week, I'm with you, LaMarca. He terrifies me because he could put up another dud as he has over these past 3 weeks. And so let's say, all right, so let's play this out. you spend 75, $100 or whatever in order to pick him up. Are you really starting him? And even if you are
I think
starting him,
you kind of have to by default, but you're not
yeah,
going to feel comfortable doing so.
that's it. So even if you do start him, how confident are you? Especially this week, I thought they did have a fairly decent. Oh no, they're playing the Giants, if I'm
Yep.
remembering correctly. So yeah, so against the Giants, okay, fine, you would be fine with that defensive matchup. But how do we know that Quentin Johnston's not going to wind up in the end zone again? He scored a touchdown in 3 straight games. I know that's not predictive, but I'm saying that so far, when Justin Herbert lets it rip downfield, it's to QJ. Or once they get into the red zone, it's to Keenan Allen. So how confident are you that even once you got this guy that you think all the metrics point to him or improving and getting past this wide receiver 35, 40 range that he's at, what's his ceiling? At best, we would say that it's around wide receiver 20. And sure, that'd be great given what we've seen so far through 3 weeks. But is that something that you want to bet on for week 4? And I have a tough time with that.
Yeah, there are some good things going on with the Chargers passing attack, right? Like I would say Justin Herbert has kind of gone up a level from what we have seen. They are passing at a much higher frequency than we have seen in years past,
Mm-hmm.
especially, when you look at some other Jim Harbaugh offenses.
Yeah.
So, like, good things overall, but I'm just worried that the target share is not going to be remotely close to what we expected, given what we saw from him last year. I mean, last year, he was a guy that was 28% target share. He's probably around 15% at the moment. And if Keenan Allen
Yeah.
and Quentin Johnston stay healthy, which,
Mm-hmm.
that's an if, I'm not sure we're getting close to that number from last year. So I'm not willing to pay the premium for him. But if you're bullish on the Chargers offense in general, he does make for like an interesting, not handcuff, that's not the right word, but like there's probably more upside if one of those two other receivers goes down.
Yeah, and that's where, to what you were saying earlier, holding some of your money so that you can make that assessment later and actually be able to capitalize on that scenario once it happens towards mid to late season. That's what we do. That's why that approach works, right? So
Yep.
I would say hold off on him. I would say those two guys are almost a completely different category. Henry would be the person that if you got him, sure, you would be comfortable starting him in week 4, no problems. Fumbling issues be damned. But for Lad McConkey, even if you did wind up picking him up and you're more or less forced to start him, I think the reason, or me having to use the phrase forced to start him, kind of says it all about where he's at right now from a fantasy standpoint. So better days ahead, or at least I'm hoping there are better days ahead for McConkey. But right now, he wouldn't be a priority ad for me, especially given how much people are going to want to try and invest in him just after 3 weeks. So I'm off of that. Okay. So yeah, Mort gave a couple of additional context. Yeah, Saquon went for $777. I mean, my goodness, he's probably going to wind up on the waiver wire here in a couple of weeks. That's tough. All right. Let's see. Next question from iPex. What's going on, man? Need some RB depth. Do you think me getting rid of CMC for Bucky and Benson is enough back? Okay, so full
Yeah.
PPR.
Seems more like a just a standard league trade question than a Guillotine
Yeah.
specific one.
Yeah.
But in that scenario, I would happily trade McCaffrey for Bucky and Benson. I
Yeah.
don't normally like to be the guy giving up one player and getting two back. I want to be the guy who's getting the best player in the deal, but CMC just kind of feels like a ticking time bomb. The utilization on him has been so ridiculously good. It's just hard to envision that continuing for the full 18-week season. And I think Bucky and Benson are both like borderline top 10 guys at the position. So I
Mhm.
would I would swing that trade in a heartbeat if I could.
Yeah. And I pulled up our trade analyzer tool that's available on fantasylife.com just to see, just from where we're at after 3 weeks of production, where that trade would sit at. And even looking at it right now, it says it's kind of even. And that's without us seeing Trey Benson have a full workload in this offense without James Conner. So let's say almost off the top, let's say it's really just so right there between Bucky Irving and Christian McCaffrey, all right, it's kind of leaning a bit towards Christian McCaffrey. And then now without having the utilization or projected utilization for Trey Benson as a part of this deal, yeah, that right now we're considering Benson from a production and usage standpoint as a backup. He's seen him mixed in. It was good to see it. And looking at his UR score of 52, that's based off of him working behind James Conner. And it was good to see him being mixed in. But now let's fast forward a couple of weeks when it is just him and Amari DiMercado, and we can at least anticipate a UR score probably close to where Bucky is at right now. I'd say 70 plus. So
Yep.
that to me would say that this is leaning more towards this trade being in your favor, getting rid of McCaffrey for essentially two, I'd say one top 12 running back for sure in Bucky Irving and a potentially top 24 running back in Trey Benson. That's kind of where I see it, at least from.
I think top 24 is very conservative.
You think so? You think he's
I
going to be in the
do.
top 12?
I think top 15.
Okay.
You know, the thing about like when a backup takes over is he could step into a role that like James Conner couldn't even have because James Conner had to contend with Trey Benson, right? Like, I'm
Yeah.
not really scared about Amari DiMercado. We've seen him. He might steal a little bit of work on passing downs. I think that Benson could be, 80+% of the running back touches from now until the end of the season. And we know about the talent level that he has. I'm bullish. I'm buying.
All right. I guess my only I guess concern, it's not even about Benson. It's really just about the state of the offense, how poor Kyler's
Sure.
been looking, and of course the drops and the Marvin Harrison Jr. of it all. If this was more a high functioning offense where really it's just been a couple of bad plays here and there, I would say Trey Benson 100%. Top 15, top 12, I have no problems with that. But with the Cardinals still continuing to struggle on offense, that passing game still not clicking outside of just the throws to Trey McBride. I mean, Michael Wilson, who folks were kind of hyping up as this kind of post-hype sleeper wide receiver too that could play on the outside. What, 3 targets or something like that on the
He
season so
stinks.
far? Yeah, it's
He's
like
just
so.
not good.
What are we going to get excited about out of this offense outside of what we've seen from James Conner trying to make stuff happen, and of course Trey Benson? So yeah, but I'm with you from an opportunity standpoint. Valuing him in the top 15, top 12, I think that makes sense. I guess my only concern is just the state of the Cardinals offense.
Sure. Reasonable.
All right. So let's see. We got another one for this from Mick Burkhat. Let's see. 2 quarterback super flex league. Got JD and Purdy slated for top of points for a while due to bye weeks hitting people. No one in my lineup has a buy until week 10. Is the move just to not bid over 200 until prices drop to that point? Okay.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
Pretty much the move is to let everybody else in the league spend their money. And then there's no better feeling in any league, really. Standard league, guillotine league, doesn't matter. When you are in the home stretch and you look at, remaining fab and everybody that you're competing with is near zero, you can just throw bids on everybody.
Yes.
$5 here, $5 there. You're handing it out like Bumpy Johnson handing out turkeys on Thanksgiving. Like,
American Gangster, baby.
yeah, it's the best. So yes, the goal, especially if you're in a spot where you're not struggling, you're not hurting, let everybody else spend their money, because the way I like to think about fab is as the number of available dollars shrinks, each dollar remaining becomes worth exponentially more, right? Like at the beginning of the season, 18 teams, everyone has $1,000. That means there's 18,000 available.
Mm-hmm.
If you get down to a 4-team league and you have 500 and everybody else is at 100 or less, you control the market. So yes, sit on your money. You make moves only when desperate, and really like try to extort as much money from your league mates as you can.
Yeah, and going back to the poker analogy, it's like when you are the big stack at the table, you have the ability to essentially set the market at that point. If you see a running back out there and you have control of most of the fab money that's out there, you can say, well, this is going to be the price, and either you're going to wind up using most or all of your stack in order to cover this player, or you're not going to get him. Pick one. but having that flexibility, or that the power essentially to put another manager to a position for most or not, or most or all of their chips. And that's really the power that comes with holding on to a lot of your budget till the very end. So I like that approach. There's a lot of parallels between a game that I like to play quite often. So no, this works out. So all right. But you brought up a point that, since we don't have too many other questions, you brought up a point that I think a lot of fantasy managers should start to care about, and that is bye weeks. We cared about injury history, and we've been freaking out over that. And of course, there's still injury concerns we have to worry about going into week 4, but bye weeks start in week 5. We have how many teams on bye here in week 5? The Falcons are off in week 5. The Bears are off in week 5. Packers and the Steelers. 4 teams off in week 5. And of course, it only gets worse from there. So let's just take that week 5 scenario and try and isolate that for a second. So thinking through all the players that are going to be on bye from those teams: Bijan Robinson, Roma Dunze. Let's see. I don't know if, Jalen Warren is probably the more productive asset from the Steelers. So those people are going to be on bye. So if you're approaching this bye week scenario, Lamarca, are you trying to add players now in order to, once Jalen Warren is on bye, you have somebody to immediately slot in? Or are you trying to play that waiting game on another level, just say, well, there's going to be a chop between now and then, so maybe I'll just wait until week 4 to add somebody to my roster? I'm more of I want to try and at least be as prepared as possible. So I will try and make some of those incremental moves, so that knowing that player might be available for me in week 5, that's what I try and do. But I can see a scenario where, okay, well, I'll just play chicken for a little bit, and then afterwards I'll try and make that move. But how do you typically approach it?
Sorry, muted myself. I have a little bit of a cold. I don't know if anyone can tell. I'm a little congested.
You sound
So
good to me, man.
I was coughing a little, so I muted myself. But
Yeah.
Yes, I think that preparing in advance is preferred, right? You want to, as we've talked about, make those small incremental upgrades to your bench where you don't necessarily have to break the bank to do so. But that being said, if you're going to be missing a key player in week 5 and you don't necessarily have a great replacement out there, and you don't feel like your team is super strong, like, yeah, at that point it might be time to shell the money out just a little bit. Um, saving your money is great until you get chopped with $1,000 in your wallet. So like, it's really a delicate dance. You need to be
Yeah.
very honest about where your lineup stands in comparison to the rest of your league, basically at all times. And if you're looking at yourself heading into week 5 and you're saying, man, without Roma Dunze, without uh, Josh Jacobs, like, I don't know if I can compete this week, then by all means, feel free to spend a little more aggressively than you normally would.
Yeah. And I'm almost thinking specifically I know running backs and wide receivers are probably going to be the thing that a lot of folks glom onto because we have to start so many. But let's even think about the onesie positions. Your quarterbacks, the guys that are going to be theoretically scoring the most on your roster from a week in, week out basis, you're going to need to plan to not have Justin Herbert on your roster for a week. The Chargers bye isn't until week 12, so you got some time. But think about, let's see, for this upcoming week, well, nobody's really starting Michael Penix. I mean, people might be starting Caleb Williams, especially if it's a 2 QB or super flex type of league. But let's say in week 6, so let's see who's coming up in week 6. Well, no, not too many teams on bye. Oh no, week 7, that's going to be the big one. Both the Ravens and the Bills are on bye in week 7. So no Josh Allen, no Lamar Jackson. I would say trying to get ahead of it and looking at some of the quarterbacks that are out there on your waiver wire now, and viewing some of the defensive matchups for them in the next few weeks, especially if you have some of those early round quarterbacks, might make some sense. So let's see. Just looking ahead, let's run out that scenario just real quick. So I pulled up my roster over on guillotineleagues.com, and let's see who's sitting out there on the waiver wire as of right now. So Jane Daniels, just because of the latest chop. Let's see. Jackson Dart, Trevor Lawrence, Sam Darnold, Carson Wentz, Jake Browning. You probably don't want Jake Browning. Michael Penix, probably not him either. Aaron Rodgers, Spencer Rattler might be able to get you through a week. So there are plenty of options out there that at least for that 1 week. So let's say for week 7, we're thinking about not having Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson. You want to try Sam Darnold.
Let's pull up Jackson Dart's schedule.
Let's look
I
at
got
it.
to
All
be
right,
honest, I'm a little bit intrigued by Dart for fantasy purposes.
all right, so let's see their upcoming schedule for the Giants. So against the Chargers, at the Saints in week 5. So that might be a reasonable start for him. Eagles in week 6, at the
Mm,
Broncos in week 7, at the
okay.
Eagles again in week 8.
Yeah, all right. Never mind on Jackson Dart. Um, those matchups are not going to help you if you have a quarterback bye in the next couple of weeks.
Maybe against
But
that Saints game, that one might be pretty solid.
right, so I get right. If you have Caleb or Jordan Love, and you've been using one of those guys, maybe Dart could fill in for you there. But the good thing about quarterback is there's only going to be more players becoming available at the position as more teams get chopped, right?
Yes.
Like the most amount of quarterbacks that are going to be owned in your league happens in week 1. So, especially if you have a later bye, I don't think that's necessarily something you need to worry about all that much, but if you do have a Josh Allen or a Lamar Jackson, somebody that really carries a lot of weight for your team, and they are going to be coming up here in week 7, it's
Mhm.
definitely not too early to start looking at matchups and trying to get ahead of that.
Right. And of course, defensive matchups and all of that, that will change as we understand a bit more about each team's or each unit's abilities and how they defend the run versus the pass and all of that. And we'll continue to collect that data and update our defense versus our offense versus position stats that's available on fantasylife.com. That is a tool or at least scoring that we keep available. So you'll be able to see, all right, well, which defenses should I really be targeting with my quarterback? Same thing for running backs and wide receivers. So doing that exercise to say, all right, well, I'm going to be out with Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson here in a couple of weeks. Which teams would make the most sense for me to try and target, and who should I really be picking up? And especially in that case, since I just mentioned Aaron Rodgers as somebody that is out there on most waiver wires, if you don't have Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson in week 7, Aaron Rodgers faces my Bengals that same week. So that would probably be the ideal target for you to pick up now so that in a couple of weeks you have a viable backup on your roster. All right. Well, only got a few minutes left. I see a question in the chat from yet another. We got a lot of Chris's tonight. This is awesome. It's just like a Chris convention or something like that. We'll answer this one question and then we'll hop on out. And of course, come back each Wednesday, 6 o'clock Eastern. Lamarck and I will be here talking strategy, guillotine leagues, trades, whatever the case may be, to get you set up for the following week. But let's see what we got from Chris Kojak. 14-team guillotine league with 12-man roster. Got Saquon, got Trey Benson, Trey McBride, McMillan, Flowers available. 852 fab left. My only running backs are Bijan and Tootin. The only wide receivers are Agbuka and JSN. So looking at that and seeing who's out there on the waiver wire, are these players that you'd want to target? If you're saying that you're kind of weak at running back, I would almost kind of toss out Trey McBride as somebody you'd want to target almost immediately.
See, I think he's my favorite guy on this list. You
Okay,
want to
tell me on it.
talk about guys that are not going to come up on the waiver wire every single week?
Uh-huh.
Elite tight ends. Um,
Okay.
there there are like what 3 guys right now maybe that you feel comfortable with as like an every week starter at the position,
Mm-hmm.
and McBride is one of them. So he's somebody that I would be aggressive in pursuing. Um, you know, your wide receiver core is only Igbuka and JSN, like, oh man, you have 2 top 20,
Yeah,
borderline top 10 options at
tough.
the position. So like, I think McBride is the guy that like, yeah, he excites me the most. Just because you're not going to have a ton of opportunities to pick him up or a Brock Bowers up. Like those are really the 2 guys that you feel best about.
And so if I'm playing this out a bit more, you're also saying, or at least maybe you're not saying it, but I'm thinking about it. It doesn't really matter what Trey McBride's positional designation is because worst case scenario, even if you have, let's say, one of the other top tight ends on your roster, you can always flex McBride. You're really just looking to have more points on your roster anyway. So having 2 lethal tight ends or ones that are going to be getting continual usage from the tight end position. They're going to essentially working as wide receivers. That's not a bad thing. I mean, you can still
Yeah.
use them like on your
And if I
roster.
have them, you don't.
Right.
Right. And again, I'm always thinking about the
Okay.
championship round. And if there are two teams left and those two teams, one of them has McBride and Brock Bowers, the other team is automatically at a disadvantage at the tight end position.
Yeah, I dig it. I dig it. So out of that group, because we were talking earlier about the Saquon Barkley's of the world likely being more readily available, Trey Benson, sure, targeting him makes some sense, but again, he might be a guy that you would want to have out there, or like that might be out there more often than not on the wire. And Tedero McMillan, I believe he also popped up on the injury report today, so wouldn't be the best target out of that group. And Flowers, I think he almost epitomizes the type of usage that while he has the name value and we've seen the production over the first 2 weeks, last week, how did he perform? Wound up
Mm.
putting up a dud. He probably is on a lot of like probably one of the most chopped players given his performance, and that can fluctuate on a week in, week out basis. So out of that group, the only person, well, the only, let's say, two players, Barkley and McBride, are those players that have the top end usage at their respective positions. But McBride, especially how he's used and where you can put him on your roster, I have to agree with you, Lamarca. He might be the one that you would probably be the most aggressive with, just because how many dud weeks can we really expect out of him? I mean, it's probably few and far in between. So I'm with that approach for sure.
Yeah. In
Well,
terms of like value over average starter at the position, I think McBride, Bowers, and then, Allen and Lamar Jackson, those might
mhm.
be like the biggest deltas right now. So
Yeah,
like that's why those guys interest me most when they're on the wire.
difference makers at the position, ones that can
Yes.
really keep you going week in and week out. I think that makes a ton of sense. And so with that, we're done for the week. RGQ, absolutely. I mean, I wouldn't say, well, take that back. Not only guillotine questions, we're answering everything, but we want to try and gear it towards as much guillotine content as possible because, I mean, we're still trying to figure all this stuff out. All the strategy, the ins and outs of how you can approach guillotine leagues. I mean, I still really find the whole format fascinating. So while we will be primarily talking about guillotine, if you have any other questions, I mean, shoot, you can toss in a managed or dynasty or whatever. We're happy to help as much as we can using the tools that we have available over at Fantasy Life. But with that being said, again, thanks for stopping by for this past hour. We'll be back next week, every Wednesday, 6 o'clock. Lamarca and I just talking ball, man. That's it. Trying to do as much as we can. So with that, appreciate y'all, and we'll catch y'all next week.